Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the last webinar for the 2021 certification training. Today, Rebecca Shademan, will be joined by Steve Charleston and Tom Stevens to talk about reporting and then also monitoring. So if we go to the next slide. So the first report I wanted to talk about is the notification of annual audit. This is triggered part because of the 2 CFR 200 Part F. You guys may remember we talked about the 2 CFR 200 when we talked about financial training and also procurement. It also comes into audit, so Part F. So it's a very big component on the implementation of the CDBG project. So each grantee is required to submit a notification of annual audit form for each year federal funds are expended. This is due no later than 60 days after the end of the recipient's fiscal year. And so oftentimes for local units of government, that is usually their fiscal year ends September 30th. So then we're expecting a lot of local units of government to submit their notification of annual audit for the prior year of expenditures come November 30th. So this is definitely one of those questions that if you are a certified administrator, make sure you connect with your clerk. We do keep track of notifications of annual audit. This is triggered if regardless of how much money you have to spend, you should always submit the notification of annual audit documenting how much you spent for the year. If you did meet the threshold of $750,000 or more was spent with federal funds, not just CDBG, home, HTF, if they received a Department of Transportation federal grant, that would also need to be reported. All of the federal dollars are taken into account from that local unit of government. And with the past year of the pandemic and the CARES Act and the ARP, those dollars have an impact on also if this will be taken into account. So keep that in mind. If $750,000 or more is spent, the local unit of government then needs to go on to the next step of conducting a single audit for the fiscal year by an independent public accountant. So there are 3 ways to submit the notification of annual audit form this year. In the past, there's only had been 2. So the first one is very standard. You mail the completed form to DED. The second is you email the completed form to DED at that specific email address. And then the third, which is brand new, is you submit within Amplifund. So we, as you can tell, are in a transitional year. We have 3 different ways. This will not always be the case. So I envision that eventually we will be attempting to gather all of these forms only within Amplifund, but this year you can submit it one of these 3 ways. The goal is to get this report to us. And then Amber, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. So give me a moment so I can bring up that form. Okay, so Amber, are you seeing the notification of the annual audit form?
Yes, I am.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so this is what the form looks like. So if you were going to be mailing it in or filling out or emailing it, this is the form that you would look at. And then in Amplifund, it is basically a digitized version of this. So the first thing that we ask is for the name of the subrecipient. So that's usually your local unit of government for the CDBG program and other programs. As you can tell, we've received several different items of federal funds in the past, which include CDBG, Home, HDF, CARES Act, American Rescue Plan, CDBG Disaster Recovery, CDBG COVID-19. So please be aware that this form, some of the language has to apply to all of these different federal funding sources. So if you have questions or if it doesn't make sense, it might be because we are using generic language that is not specific to the CDBG program. We're trying to make it specific just to federal grants. You will identify the end date of the federal fiscal year. And usually for local units of government, that is September 30th. However, there are local units of government that have a different fiscal year, so that is something to be aware of. Then you would list out the source of the funds. So if you are getting CDBG funds and the grant number here, and then the amount that you expended for the year. So not the amount you were awarded, but the actual expenditure of it. And you would do this for any federal dollars that the local unit of government had received. Oftentimes, it's not the certified administrator completing this. It is the financial officer at that local unit of government who should be filling this out. Overall, the certified administrator just serves as a reminder and to that financial officer, the clerk, saying, hey, don't forget to send this in. This is coming up due, just to make sure everything's good with it. So, so then you'll identify how much you've spent. This will total up. And then if it is below $750,000, you will select this radial button of it's below. But if it is above it, you will indicate it is above, and it does trigger a single audit is required here. And then the contact person for audit submittal will be identified. Again, this should be a representative from that local unit of government. And then the certification is signed by the chief elected official or the chief financial officer. So have we received any questions on this? And then if I went too fast with instructions, page 2 has some lovely instructions here also on how to fill this out. So, okay.
Hey, Rebecca,
And,
we do a question.
Okay.
Will it be possible to submit NAA through Amplifund if the organization doesn't have an active grant in Amplifund but does expend federal funds?
I'm going to see if I can read that question real quick. So I guess the question that I have for you is active grant. So active grant for us here at the department means that it has not received certificate of completion for the CDBG program. So it might be done in your books as completed, but in our books it's still open. So if you have a specific grant and it's officially closed, that, you should still have access to it, but I'm not entirely sure because we're only in year 2 of Amplifund. Steve, have you heard that during discussion during managers meetings at all, or? I will look into that.
No.
Okay.
I haven't heard the discussion, but we can, as you say, check with staff.
So we only care about the notification of annual audit being submitted to us if you have if you're expending funds that we contracted out with you. So if you have a local unit of government and they have no grant agreements with DED whatsoever, that should not be submitted to us. That this is part of subpart F. Those other departments, I'm sorry, I'm probably butchering this question very much in answering it. So just keep that in mind, is if you have not received any contracts with DED, we aren't expecting the notification of annual audit being submitted to us. But if you do have some contracts with us, we are expecting them, and for you to document that, plus any other additional contracts you have with other organizations, whether with the U.S. government directly or with agencies here in Nebraska who then contract out with that local unit of government. Hopefully that made sense, Kristen. Okay. I see that we have another question. Is a single audit acceptable for expenditures under the threshold? You can do a single audit that is up to the local unit of government. So if it is your policy and procedure to do a single audit at a more restricted level, maybe the local unit of government has put in place a $500,000 threshold, that is completely fine. It's just we are holding to the federal requirements of if you expended $750,000 or more, you do have to submit that audit to us. So anything else you want to add, Steve?
The only addition is to make sure that that's an expenditure within that fiscal year, so that you're dealing with federal funds expended.
Okay, so we will follow up with Robin Kilgore, who oversees the notification of annual audit. She's our Chief Financial Officer, about that first question we received, and kind of ask about the logistics of that, and also with our Amplifund connection, Jennifer Zarek, and see if that is something, and we'll get back to you. If not today, it'll probably be next week, because I know Robin is out on vacation. So, okay. And then, Amber, if you want to go back to the presentation. Okay, so next up is the job creation retention reports, and Tom Stevens is joining me in this presentation on this one. So Tom, I'll let you take it away. If you can please unmute. Maybe. Tom, I believe I have the authority to unmute you, so I know you were having problems with this, so I'm going, oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
I
Okay,
can.
Okay. So job creation. When you do an economic development CDBG grant, one of the national objectives is LMJ, or low to moderate. It's basically primarily benefiting new jobs that primarily benefit low to moderate income people. You also have to report on this job creation report, take a look at it, that has characteristics, beneficiary data, as well as reports to jobs and the data hire and things like that. There's no sensitive information on there, so avoid that. And then when you close a grant out, besides reporting every 6 months, you'll create a final report. The final report, typically, it's been signed often by the administrator, but if you want to certify it with the business, you can have the business sign it. So that's another on the final report, is a good way to audit the number, and as well as get verification from the business that that's what's actually happened. These reports are due again at the January 30th and July 30th. Okay, so the way this report gets created is from base information found on this employee certification form. So when you have a project like this, you advise the business that the employee certification form should be preferably used at time of interview, so that if they're interviewing, say, a couple of candidates for a job, they would fill out the form, and then if the low to moderate income person or the high income person, all the beneficiary data is on that form. They've provided it through that form. And so that helps you complete that report. Then that form is signed by the employee and the employer. And then we get a copy of that and verify the job creation report is filled out correctly. Next slide.
So Tom, I do have a screen. I do have a copy of the report, and I will show that to the group. Just give me 1 second. I navigate. Okay, so I did provide you guys a copy of this report also for your reference. So these are instructions. And again, this is a very small group of CDBG projects out there. So we just don't know what you will be signing up for once you become certified administrator, or if you are a certified administrator currently, if this is something you are doing, or if this is something that a local unit of government who has hired you wishes to move into. So Tom, I do have this up if you want me to highlight anything on this form.
No, the main thing is just read the directions and then use the employee certification form to fill it out. It's pretty self-explanatory after that. And again, it's highly specialized. If you're going to do a project that has LMJ, usually Talk to Me will coach you through it considerably and so forth.
And we currently are accepting these as paper forms, but eventually they will be pulled into Amplifund. And please be aware as we are changing when reports are submitted to us either electronically via Amplifund or via the paper-based forms that we had been using. So, okay, Amber, back to the PowerPoint.
Rebecca, did you have a copy of the employee certification form in their packet?
No, but I could pull it up off the website.
Yeah, okay, just remind them that's out there.
Okay. I can pull that up after the program income reports. So at a previous webinar during the certification, we had Nick and Tom go over the program income reports. So just wanted to remind everyone that the grantees report on the CDBG program income earned on a semi-annual basis. So these are due 30 days after June 30th and 30 days after December 31st. We do have separate program income reports to be completed. So it depends on the type of program income that was created, and then also what you are purposing using your program income for. So we have economic development projects and we have normally housing projects. So if you are in doubt of what you should complete, always reach out to Nick and also Tom Stevens. We've had some unique instances that have happened, but it is very important to report to us on program income because we are required to report on it to HUD. So that is extremely important. So, and then next slide. And then Tom, did you want me to bring up that certification report real quick?
Not necessarily, just so they know it's out there. All the reports are available on the website.
Okay. If once we go through all the PowerPoints, I'll bring that up. Thank you. Okay, notice of contract award, LSC 7. So we talked about during our previous webinar, I think last week on Thursday, we talked about construction and labor standards and how that all works. So one of the reports we mentioned during that conversation that we need to be provided here at DED just to know the status of your project is a notice of contract award, which we affectionately call the LSC 7. So this is due to us within 10 days after awarding the contract. After that local unit of government awards the contract to the construction contractor. So I'm going to share my screen again, Amber. Bring that up. So, oh, I do have a copy of the certification form, Tom. We'll talk about that after the waivers, the contract award. So the LSC 7, so we talked about this. We are still accepting paper copies. I'm hoping within the next month to get this finalized in Amplifund and then available to you guys to complete within there. But this is telling you some core information. and you're also informing us. So you're telling us the grant number, who the subrecipient is, county, the federal wage determination number, the modification number that's in place at time of contract award to your construction contractor, the publication date, and then the date that you verified it. So remember, you have to verify the federal wage determination 10 days prior to bid opening. So we're looking for that date that you verified, and it should be 10 days prior to this bid opening date. So, and then also that you verified your SAM for your contractor eligibility, the contract award date, the amount, and the estimated contract start date, and then the name and address and the description of work to be completed. And if known at that time, the subcontractor and the brief description of work and the SAM verification date. So oftentimes you provide this to us 10 days after the local unit of government has done the contract award. Maybe at that time, the general contractor that was hired does not know all of their subcontractors. You can resend this in as a revised and then notate to us the new subcontractors that are associated with this project. So this will help us. We do labor standards compliance is a very lengthy process for us at the state. So this helps us determine when we are going to monitor projects, how much time we need to dedicate to reviewing the labor standards. So I always hope it will be one general contractor doing it all and they have no subcontractors and it's super easy. But more commonly we have 3 to 5 subcontractors on the project, and most uncommonly we had 36 subcontractors on a project. And that was a very fun project to review, and we were somewhat surprised on the number of those. I think that took the award for most subcontractors on a project. Steve, do you recall any other ones that have had a lot of subcontractors, or is that the same for you?
There's a number of tourism ones that have had, as you mentioned, substantial number of contractors and subcontractors, and also depended upon whether there was a construction manager form used. So, and then as was mentioned in the labor standards training, some of those subs were one person in terms of sole proprietor or partnership. So it even causes greater dilemmas in terms of tracking.
So we also need this form signed by the labor standards designee. So oftentimes this is the CDBG certified administrators. However, it sometimes can be somebody else within maybe the engineering firm. It could be someone, another entity at the office. That is, we see sometimes with development districts, sometimes they have a specific person on staff that focuses on labor standards and they review everything with labor standards. So it is important to denote who is the lead on this. And then this is emailed to both myself and Terry McAuliffe. Terry McAuliffe is our lead on processing these forms. I am a backup just in case. So that is why you emailed both of us. So, and then we'll just go back since I don't know, Tom, are you still on the phone or did you jump off? Here is that employee certification form that he referenced with his other
I'm here.
report. Is there anything else you want to highlight on this?
Just the main problem I see with it is it's not kept current for HUD income guidelines. And so just be aware that usually the guidelines make it easier to be LMI, or the numbers keep going higher. So keep that form current would be the main thing. And then also, if for instance, your business is located in a certain city, but the labor force is drawn from several counties, that you should have the additional pages for showing those counties where your employee or potential employee might come from. That's
Cool. So, and then this also identifies the race and ethnicity of the individual, and then the employee signs it. So, awesome. And then Amber, back to the PowerPoint. Okay, next slide. Final wage compliance reporting. Next slide. So this final report is only applicable to those projects that trigger Davis-Bacon related acts. So if they spent $2,000 or more on construction projects, they are triggering Davis-Bacon. So this does need to be completed and submitted to the department. So just remember, that's almost every category here except for planning and the owner-occupied rehab category that we offer. There could be some additional categories depending on the nature of specific projects, but please be aware of that. And then we'll go 2 more slides, and then I'll show you what those both look like. The verification of lawful presence public benefit summary report. Next slide. So this is a requirement of state statute. It's due by December 31st, and it's applicable to grantee contracts involving public benefit. So, and we need to identify the number of applicants who did and did not receive public benefit. And then for everyone's lovely reference, I included a reference from the Nebraska Revised State Statutes. So you can take a look at the revised statutes. The grantee shall have each applicant for public benefits under this contract complete the United States Citizen Attestation Form. So let's go to these forms real quick. I think I'm getting better at sharing my screen. Okay. So this is what the final wage compliance report looks like. This also will be going into Amplifund. It's just needing to be finalized by the department. Currently, we are accepting it as a paper form. And this is a core document that needs to be provided to the department in order for us to issue closeout. So this is very important for us. So you identify the grantee, the date the project was completed, the grant number, the wage determination number, and then also your program rep. So you are identifying that you reviewed the contractor's payrolls and everybody was paid accordingly. And then also you are also identifying if restitution needs to be paid. So you will identify who is paying for the restitution, and then you'll identify the specific contractor name and or subcontractor name and the names of the affected employees and the amount of restitution paid to employees and the nature of violation leading to restitution. So please be aware of this. Steve, is there anything else you would like to add?
No, and I will. In terms of the restitution paid, be sure that restitution is actually documented as you go through the files where you would record and save within your labor standards file. That's it.
So thank you. And then this form is also signed by normally the labor compliance officer that was selected, or it could also be your CDBG certified administrator. So, okay. So next one. Okay, so for your benefit, I included the old paper copy of the verification of lawful presence for public benefits eligibility. It is currently has had some transformations over the last couple of years. It has moved into SurveyMonkey to be completed that way. And I'm not aware if we are continuing to use the SurveyMonkey or if we'll be transitioning to with an Amplifund for this one. So please keep an eye out for that. Joseph Lauber, our Deputy Director and Chief Legal Officer for our agency, is in charge of this. And so if you have any questions on how to complete this form, he is your go-to guy. But for your reference, I did include the paper form so then you are aware of the questions that you will be expected to complete in a digital format. So we'll be asking who's prepared the report, and then we'll be asking who is the grantee name, contract number, the references for the contract, and then also the time period applicable for submitting this report. So often we see this within our owner-occupied rehabilitation activities that we offer here within the CDBG program. So you do have to review the citizen status of each applicant also. And then identify. So you'd be taking into account the number of applicants that applied for assistance and the number of applicants rejected to inability to verify lawful presence in the United States. So those are two main ones there. So other types, we do see this maybe sometimes with individuals or sole proprietors that for commercial rehabilitation, it's not very common. But Steve, do you see that a lot? I have not, but I don't often review DTR at this point.
No.
Okay. So this is something to be aware of. It's a state statute and applies to the CDBG, Home, HTF, Rural Workforce Housing Fund, the Nebraska Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and I believe any state program that we have a public benefit that we oversee. So please be aware of that. And again, if you have questions, Joseph Lauber, you can reach him by emailing him there. So, okay, we will go back to the PowerPoint. I will stop sharing. Any questions so far?
No new questions.
No new questions. Okay, great. Okay, next slide. Final financial report. Next slide. This is a core document that we need for closeout. So please remember this. So if you do look at your closeout chapter, which is chapter 16, we do reference all the closeout components that are required. This will be submitted with an Amplifund. We are finalizing testing of the final financial right now. I know this has held up several projects from moving to closeout officially. So we're hoping shortly, hopefully it will be finalized so then you can complete this, but this will be submitted in Amplifund. We have not accepted paper copies since June 14th, so we understand there is a need to get this completed and available to you. This form identifies the CDBG funds, the local match funds, and any CDBG program income applied to the project. And it also includes any funds that will be returned to DED. And then next slide. Okay, I'm going to share my screen real quick again to show the final financial. And Steve loves this report. so he will help me present on it. Okay, so within your packet, I believe this is 07, and I will make this much bigger. So we do have instructions on the first page, and again, this will be showing up in Amplifund, but again, a lot of the information that we requested on the paper form will be the same that we request in the Amplifund. So hopefully this helps you connect it a little bit better. So we will be taking a look at your codes, your activities that were funded with our CDBG grant agreement. So we will have you list each code out that is listed on your contract between the Nebraska Department of Economic Development and then also local unit of government. And then you'll also identify total cost of the activity. You'll also identify program income and the local cost share by activity. And then you'll also identify the total approved CDBG project amount. So one thing here, we do have funds that are canceled and returned back to the department. That is line 5. That is A-okay to cancel funds and return back to the department. We just put them back into our CDBG program and award them out in the next application cycle. So please be aware of that. So Steve, anything, you're a little bit more, you review every single one of these, so anything you want to touch upon?
The form itself or actions they should take?
I will not limit you.
Okay. As Rebecca's mentioned, we're going through transition with Amplifund. I would encourage you when submitting the form that on the final financial, that be submitted with a final draw. We're looking at not retaining funds, in other words, the local government to draw all their funds, and that final financial coming with the draw of the final funds for that project. Be sure that you know what you're canceling. It says unspent grant amount. There'll be some changes in the form, but as we move into Amplifund, but I've noticed over the years that the local governments and the certified administrators in cases have balances on hand they're unaware of. So you want to make sure, as you do have, as we do, staff turnover, who's managing each of those subrecipients or grantees, as was called at one time, that you have a clear understanding of the financial standing as far as what's been drawn and what the balances are. In other words, you don't want to leave money on the table when it comes to the period that the contract end date is expired, even if there are amendments. Anything else you want to add, Rebecca?
Nope, I think you covered it. So again, this will be submitted in Amplifund. We're finalizing this also along with the other forms I referenced earlier in the presentation. So hopefully we'll get this out. And then this is a core closeout item that we need in order to close out your grant. So we do have Part 3, Part 4, and certification. This is signed by the chief elected official. So if you're not sure if you completed this form, it is okay correctly. It's okay to reach out to your program rep to ask them, hey, can you check this form before I have the chief elected official sign it? That's completely fine. We'd rather make sure it's right the first time that you present to that chief elected official instead of us saying you did it wrong. You're going to have to redo it and get the chief elected official signature. This needs, just like your Davis-Bacon payrolls that we discussed last Thursday, this is a clean copy. There should be no crossouts. It should be exactly perfect on this. So please be aware of that. Also, sometimes we get cross-outs, and that is not acceptable. You guys have been current certified administrators have gotten really good about it in the last 3 years. So hopefully we continue that mindset. So, okay, double checking. I think that is it for, if we go back to the presentation now. Project status reports. Next slide. So project status reports are one of the main items that we use to determine how the project is going for implementation. So these are submitted twice a year to the department. First, the reporting period end dates end June 30th and December 31st. This year it's been a little weird. The reports ending June 30th received several extensions. They were due on September 30th, but I know we have a couple of local units of government still having difficulties accessing Amplifund. And if that is the case for projects that you are working on, please make sure you have reached out to your program representative and inform them, and then also DED.support@nebraska.gov to make sure we can get that handled. So normally, we'll get back onto the regular schedule. The next report would be due January 30th. Final reports can be submitted at any time as soon as all project activities are completed. So this is a main document. Please don't forget to submit these. We do need to provide HUD an update on the status of grants that we have awarded in their system, and we use the information from these reports to report to HUD. So next slide. So why is this important? All vested parties need to understand what is happening with the project and what is not happening with the project. So like I said, we provide this information to HUD. That includes beneficiary information, the accomplishment impact numbers, along with the narrative, and then any issues that may have came up with it. Maybe we did have a contractor one time whose vehicle was set on fire at the work site. So that was an interesting project status report to read on why something is delayed. So appreciate that. Next slide. If you do not submit these project status reports and you're continually late and they're incomplete, misleading, maybe you keep telling us everything's fine, but you haven't even procured your construction contractor, and the contract between DED and the local unit government ends in 2 months. That will be a problem. DED reserves the right not to fund, so we could terminate a contract for cause on that situation. So please be aware of that. We do need reports submitted to us. We need to be informing both HUD, also of the progress of these federal funds. Next slide. So with the onset of Amplifund, we have a new layout of getting this information from everyone. There are 4 types of forms going on. So they include national objectives, indicator beneficiary data, maybe Levy and Section 3 reporting, and new hires, which is part of Section 3 reporting. Next slide. So the first step is to review the subrecipient agreement. You need then to identify the activities. You need to identify the national objectives met, and then the type of beneficiary. So I am going to share my screen real quick. So let's do that. Let's have a practice round real quick. So I do have a project here. I pulled up one of our contracts within the DTR program. Here is, we'll start at the beginning because I don't think I've showed you guys what one of our contracts looks like. So oftentimes our contracts look as such. Here's the contract number, 20 DTR 006. They identify the community. One of the core areas that you do need to look at is item D and E. Please make sure this information is correct, especially if it differs from what is in the application. So this project is meeting the national objective of LMI through limited clientele, and then here are the proposed beneficiaries listed, and you'll note that it equals above 51% core item there. Nobody asked us this training round, but oftentimes we get the question of, can you round up? And no, you cannot round up to meet that 51%. Item E here is also referencing Slow and Blight national objective that will be met with this project. So we know from reviewing the first 2 pages here that the 2 national objectives are limited clientele and then also Slum and Blight on an area basis. So we're going to take a look at the next couple of pages for folks. Terms and conditions. So if you are a new certified administrator or a recurring one, your contract is your go-to document to kind of assess what is this project going on, and gives you a quick snapshot of the funds, the national objective, the time period, and then also the activities. So here we know they are being awarded $435,000. Of that $435,000 being awarded, that includes $25,000 for general administration costs. We have a time of performance, November 5th of 2020 to November 4th, 2022. This is core here. Please be aware of that. And then we also, I believe it was 2 weeks ago when we talked about special conditions for release of funds. So here, part 2 references all of your special conditions. And this is due no later than February 5th of 2021. So we have environmental review. You'll notice a lot of these forms we've talked about during our training: authorization to request funds form, financial management, procurement standards, excessive force, fair housing, certified administrator, and then also LEP. And sometimes we have other special conditions. So since this is a downtown revitalization program, these do require program guidelines. So we needed to approve the program guidelines prior to all the special conditions being met. Next up is part 3. This is another core item. This is telling us all of our activities. So construction management, general program administration, rehabilitation of commercial public. This is basically commercial rehab. You'll notice that these codes are 14E, 21A, 14E, 03L. These are HUD matrix codes that we have shifted beginning in 2020 grant agreements. Anything prior, we used Nebraska created codes. So you might see a 380 next to construction management. You might see a 181 next to general program administration. Those have all been migrated into the new system of Amplifund and should reflect the HUD matrix codes associated with them. So 181 becomes 21A. I forget what commercial rehab used to be. But please keep that in mind. If you are working on an older contract and you don't know what the Nebraska code translates back to the HUD matrix code and are confused, contact your program rep. We can look it up. We'll go back. We've received one question recently. We had to go back to their application to assess what was this type. So especially with older grants, sometimes HUD updates their HUD matrix code, and so it's not a clean line anymore. So we have to associate it with a more common, the current code. Hopefully I did not just lose a bunch of people while speaking on all of that. So we're taking a look at this, and then just to finish this out, just wanted to, we reference program income here for everyone to be aware of how it's created, matching fund requirement, and then who can sign everything, uniform administrative requirements. We are telling you all of the requirements associated with implementing a CDBG program here. So we have reports referenced. So definitely read your entire contract before beginning the project to be aware of everything. Anything else, Steve, you want me to highlight within this agreement?
No, I believe you covered. Just make sure that, as Rebecca said, there are those subrecipients that will have other special conditions. So then I would encourage you strongly to review the contract in terms of that agreement prior to execution, in case there is inconsistencies or errors within it, because it does happen. So it's always good it's very positive if we receive those instead of having to go through an amendment process.
Yep. Okay, so for this project, I know for everyone's reference, the two main activities are commercial rehab, this 14E, and sidewalks. Construction management folds underneath commercial rehab, so be aware of that. So I already took a look at the application, and we're going to skip that step. So at this point in time, I already know that commercial rehab is meeting the slum and blight on an area basis, and sidewalks is meeting our LMC national objective. I'm going to go and take a look at the other handout that I gave you guys. And I gave this to you guys for the first webinar, but this is super helpful. If you are not aware of the beneficiary accomplishment type that your activity is benefiting, take a look at this. So I think it was 14E, so we'll scroll down. And we're hoping as we build in Amplifund, this becomes a little bit more targeted for you guys and helps you out. But at this point, their logic needs to be used by the end user to make sure that you are reporting correctly. So 14E, we have commercial rehab. I already told you it's meeting slum and blight on an area basis here. So then it says, I will be reporting on businesses, okay? Next, we're going to go down to sidewalks, which I don't remember the code. 03. I am very far away. So sidewalks, I already know it's going to meet LMC, and so that is people. So I'll be reporting on people. So I have two different types of projects, activities, and they're meeting two different accomplishment types, okay? Now, let's say this entire project was funded with slum and blight on an area basis, including the sidewalks, then we would also be reporting on people for that. So always be aware of your accomplishment type because this feeds into your reporting aspect. Then I think we will go back to the PowerPoint. Actually, let me see if I can share this other window. Maybe not. So I did create another example that does not follow the contract that we showed up, just for everyone's mindset. So if you are working with an older project, I recommend building out one of these lovely tables just so then you know you're doing everything correctly. I was asked a question regarding an old contract. The Nebraska code was 590 for commercial rehab, gave them the updated code, which is the new code description. It was meaning slum and blight, meaning businesses. So I have 2 forms that I need to complete specifically for this activity, and that is slum and blight on an area basis, and then also indicator businesses assisted. Same with removal of architectural barriers, that's meaning LMC, people, and so I need to fill out a national objective form, and then I also need to complete a indicator beneficiary data form. I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint because I kind of skipped ahead with these references to the forms, but hopefully you guys are still connecting everything. And then Amber, I haven't seen any questions, but have you?
I haven't seen any new questions.
Okay. So we just took a look at our subrecipient agreement. We took a look at the activities reference. We took a look at the national objectives meant, and we also identified the type of beneficiary. So that's the first thing that you are doing when kind of figuring out what type of project you're working on. So first up, national objectives. So we have created several forms in the Amplifund specific to your national objectives. The first is LMA, low moderate income on an area basis, LMC, limited clientele, LMH, low moderate income housing, LMJ, low moderate income jobs, SBA, slum and blight on an area basis, SBS, slum and blight on a spot basis. And then we also have urgent needs, which we only have a handful of projects, I think less than 10 at this point, that meet the national objective of urgent need. So one of the things that I want you guys to note, I have stars next to the LMH and LMJ forms. These are a little bit different, and we'll go over that briefly during this presentation. So just note they're a little bit different. Next slide. So for project status on the national objective, we want you to be identifying on the form that we've created for that national objective for that activity, the progress of that activity during the 6-month period, and also the planned progress of activities for the next 6 months. We also need you to identify any beneficiaries that were actually assisted. So during the 6-month period. So keep in mind, if you are building if you're doing a street improvements project, you're not going to have actual beneficiaries to report until people can walk on that street. So it's not until normally the final report or near the end of the project and everything's done that you don't report. Now, you may have a owner-occupied rehab project that you are implementing, and you have rehabbed one house during that 6-month project. The homeowner is good. There is no construction signs going on. Everyone's happy. They're drinking a cup of coffee in that house. Everything's good. You would report that one house as it is completed. So keep that in mind. And also note, for all of our low moderate income activities that are meeting the national objective of either through LMI and the subcategories of LMA, LMC, LMH, LMJ, you do need to report on race and ethnicity for the total population, and race and ethnicity Hispanic, and also income levels. Okay, next slide. Project status, we have another form because we tried to make this simple, but it's gotten more complicated, called indicator beneficiary data. So the previous forms that we were talking about were on national objective and the progress being made within that national objective. We have a secondary form called indicator beneficiary data. this tells us the proposed beneficiaries and the actual served during the reporting period. So if you have an LMH or LMJ activity, we folded these questions in for indicator beneficiary data within their national objective form, and we'll take a look at that once we get through the slides here. Next slide. I don't remember what I was planning here. Next slide. Also for Meeby-Weeby in Section 3, these are general cross-cutting regulations that we do have to report on. And you identify all the contracts that the local unit of government has executed to implement the project. So we would need the name of the contractor, subcontractor, their address, the federal tax ID number, or if they don't have one, the social security number, just the last 4 digits. We are requesting the type of trade, the business's racial ethnic code, whether it's a women-owned business, and the amount of the contract, and whether it meets the Section 3 criteria. Next slide. In association with Meeby-Weeby, Section 3, scratch that. In association with Section 3, we also have to, as defined within 24 CFR 135, we also have to report on the new hires hired due to the CDBG project that met the Section 3 definition. So we did send out an announcement regarding upcoming webinar on Section 3. It's because we have a new regulation. I believe it's 24 CFR 75, and there are different reporting requirements. So if you have not registered for that training, please do so, because this has an impact on any contracts executed by the department and local units of government after November 30th, 2020. So please be aware this would have an impact on any brand new 2021 applications you submitted for CDBG, everything. So the one thing I'm going to say is if you have a contract agreement executed for Section 3 and it was prior to November 30th, 2020, you still fall under the 24 CFR 135 rules, and you will continue out your reporting as identified by 24 CFR 135. So we are in another transition stage in regulation implementation. So the fun just keeps coming with Amplifund and also new regulations. Great times. Next slide. Okay, so Amber, have you logged out of Amplifund? I think I may.
At the moment, I'm in.
Okay, do you want to share your screen? Because I am logged out. Okay, so we're going to take a look at, can you go to your first tab? I'm hoping that's your main screen. Okay, and then can you zoom in on this a little bit? Like Control plus sign, 3 clicks. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so we're skipping a lot of steps. This is not a training on navigation at all with Amplifund. So we have fast forward, you have logged in, you have access to all the grants that you have been hired to be the CDBG certified administrator for. You are doing great. So it is semi-annual project status report time. We're going to pretend it's January 5th, 2022. So you're going to come into your award and you'll go to custom up here, and you'll see all of these reports come up, and the ones that you are focusing on are project status. So if you have a 2020 project contract, we tailored all of the project status reports that you are showing up to be related to your project activities. If you have an older grant that was migrated over, you have access to all of the project status reports that we ever created which is great, but also confusing for you, which we understand, and which is why a lot of program reps have been getting a lot of questions of which specific forms do they need to complete, which is fine. So nice little hack here that I don't think is intuitive for most users is if you don't see all the forms, on your screen when you initially log in and do this drop down, you'll see that we have a couple missing. You do the control key plus the minus key, and then you'll minimize your screen, and you'll see even more custom forms we created for this. So please be aware of that little trick if you are missing forms. Now, if you are legitimately missing forms and it's not because it's needs to be minimized, contact your program rep. It's an easy fix for us to add additional forms for you, and we can get that fixed for you fairly quick. So, Amber, we're going to attempt, can you find a form that you already have open that is LMA or national objective? Okay, let's go with this one. And then can you zoom in, control plus sign a couple times? And then I think we have a question. I will see if I can. Okay, we will get to that question soon. Okay, so here is our project status report. So this is one of our national objectives. So as we were talking, we have an activity that is named the national objective of LMA. So one of the core components that we have everyone fill out on these status reports are what report number you are, the year that you're completing for the reporting period and date. So if we were filling this out for January 5th, 2022, we would put the year 2021. Because our reporting period ended December 31st, 2021. We would identify what reporting period we are selecting. So you have three options there, January 1 to June 30th or July 1 through December 31st or final report. You select the one that applies to your project status report. The next option is only filled out if you have a final report being submitted. So we do have a much longer presentation on this for project status reports, and I will provide that to all of you guys and show you where that's at on our website. But we're going to just do a precursor. So we're in the LMA project status report. You're going to then identify every activity that on your contract that is meeting the national objective of LMA in the order of largest of CDBG funds to smallest. So scroll down. So on the PowerPoint slide, we talked about on every national objective form, you identify the progress of activities. You would be, here's what this looks like now. You'd be identifying the progress of your activities. And then also planned activities for the next 6 months. So next up is low and moderate income on an area basis. Next. So these are actual beneficiaries. So again, if you are doing an LMA project and you can't walk on that street or sidewalk, you're going to enter 0. So please keep that in mind. So we do have some LMA activities that do report as items are completed. So it's very rare, but most of the time, just be aware, think of what type of activity you are doing. And as I said in the PowerPoint presentation, you do need to identify the race and ethnicity of both the total population of those individuals you assisted during this reporting period. And so normally these are all 0s until you can walk on that street. So keep scrolling down. Same with Hispanic, race and ethnicity, and income levels. So this is kind of what it looks like. So every project status report, you do need to certify that it is done and completed. There's a certification statement. It is signed by the certified administrator at the very bottom there. And then if you keep scrolling down, Amber, we know that these forms are worked on over a period of time. So we want to make sure that they are officially done before we start looking at them and providing technical assistance. So you'll always have to indicate yes if it is ready for submission, and then also the date that you are submitting the form. So that's what the LMA form looks like. A lot of the LMC form, the Slum and Blight form, the urgent need form, all look the same, except you won't be reporting on race and ethnicity and income levels for Slum and Blight and urgent need. So, but Amber, can you pull up an LMH form? Watch, it'll be the one you didn't open. If we find LMJ, I'll take that one too. Okay, so LMJ, similar to LMH, we have several of the same properties that we discussed, but we also included that indicator beneficiary data within these forms because it was so targeted for these activities that we are doing. So if you scroll down past this, keep going. Very similar to what we talked about with LMA here. Here you'll see indicator beneficiary data. So we have jobs created. So for LMH and LMJ, we folded in the indicator beneficiary data forms so you didn't have to fill out a separate form. They're all just in one. So normally you would have 3, if you were doing an economic development category funded project or a owner-occupied rehab project, you standardly normally have 3 forms for that. Other projects may have a minimum of 4 or more. So, and again, ask your program rep to make sure if you are new to this, if you completed everything correctly. So, Amber, I know I said we weren't going to look at LMH, but do you know if you have that one? Is there some? Yes. Yay. You're going to scroll all the way down to that beneficiary indicator. So we have a couple of items that are unique to LMH. So regarding cross-cutting regulations, I just wanted to point out during this presentation. So again, this is very similar to previous. If you go to the next section after this. Oh, scroll up, sorry. I'm looking for lead-based paint, if that helps you. Here we go, female head of household. So you are completing female head of household here, and then also we have lead-based paint, cross-cutting regulations that we also need to report on. So if earlier in your reporting form you said that you assisted 1 house during the last 6 months, be sure you complete the lead-based paint requirement information here. This should align with everything. So if you have a house that was constructed before 1978, there would be lead hazard remediation actions normally applied. So you would then need to fill out the items below. And we go into much more detail on this in the separate PowerPoint, which I will email out afterwards. So this presentation is just to give you a review of this. And as Nick talked about during his program income presentation, This is also information you would need to report on for program income on the program income report. So if you scroll down a little bit more. Okay, so we do need to know for the owner-occupied rehab section, all of the homeowners you assist must be LMI. However, we do, in our reporting to HUD, have to report on the total. So you do have a little bit of duplication here. But of the households that you assisted, you then need to identify, if you scroll down to 2A.1, you do need to identify if the one house you assisted during rehab is occupied in an elderly household. Did you bring this up from substandard to NDED rehab standards? Did you make that household unit that you rehabbed lead safe? And then did you make this accessible under 504? We do need those questions answered from everyone. So, okay. Steve, anything else you want to add to the national objective project status forms that we created for folks?
No, you covered it, Rebecca.
Okay, so we did receive a question on incomes. So for LMJ and LMH, you have an application basis for that, and you would get that information from application intake. For LMA, LMC, you would get that from the census website. And after the break, I will try to pull that up. So these are the national objective forms. You would only fill out the national objective forms for the activities that you were funded for that met that national objective. Okay, so one of the reasons we have so many forms is we have the capabilities of funding so many different types of activities, and local units of government can become creative on how to implement those activities within their project. So we were not able to fold in, like we did with LMH and LMJ, the indicator beneficiary data, because there were just too many different components to get to that point, and we thought it would be confusing. So we created a separate form, which maybe was even more confusing. So Amber, can you find an indicator beneficiary form on one of your open tabs? Okay, so for our contract that we reviewed today, we had commercial rehab and then also sidewalks. So sidewalks are a public infrastructure activity. They're added infrastructure. So we would need to complete this form. So if you scroll down, so we have you identify, first you need to identify what type of national objective you're completing your activity references. So for ours, it was meeting LMC, so that's a low moderate income activity. We would identify the proposed, and then for this report, we're able to walk on that sidewalk, so we're gonna make sure that the number of beneficiaries assisted matches up for that sidewalk with what is in their contract. So that's super simple, but then we have these secondary questions of 2A.1. Of like the 251 people we assisted with our sidewalks creation, we would need to identify the number of persons with new access to facility or infrastructure, number of persons assisted with improved access to facilities or infrastructure, or the number of persons that no longer have. If Amber scrolls down, I'll be able to read the rest of that. Substandard facility or infrastructure. So oftentimes, if you are replacing the sidewalks that are all broken and with a safety hazard, and wheelchairs weren't able to go on those sidewalks. Oftentimes we see people fill out 2A.2 for improved access to that infrastructure. And that number would align with their overall numbers identified in the contract. So, okay. And then we have this broken down in LMI in total. So if you did not have, and this is just for those groups that are, thank you, Amber. Normally, this is when you have people beneficiaries. You're filling out this form. Your accomplishment type is people. So in our project, we don't, in the contract I showed you, we had sidewalks and then also commercial rehab. Commercial rehab is the accomplishment type is businesses. So this, we would not fill out some wide activities here. We would put zeros in everything. And then if you scroll down, we also have a section on urgent need. So cool. So that is one indicator beneficiary data form. Amber, let's see if we can get lucky and find another one. Okay, so we do award planning grants also. So normally planning grants are have the accomplishment type of people. And with, if you scroll down, so oftentimes we did not break this out. Majority of times it's funded with meeting the national objective of low moderate income. However, we do have prior projects, older grants if you are hired on, that did meet it through Swim and Blight. The only thing that you would do differently with Swim and Blight here is you would never fill out the LMI total because you weren't assisting LMI people. You were assisting the entire Swim and Blight area designation. Again, you'll notice indicator beneficiary data really depends on the type of activity, and it was difficult for us to fold into those national objectives when it came to the type of activity you were implementing. Amber, let's see if you can find the businesses one. Next one. Next one. Oh, maybe we didn't open it. I don't think you opened it. That's okay. So businesses for commercial rehab, that is different. We have a separate form that's completed for that. We'll see if you can pull it up. You might have to hit the control minus sign. It's at the very bottom. 2 up from there. Yeah. Okay, so while we are waiting for that to load, we'll see if there's any questions that came up. Okay, so I'll take you guys to the census website after this, after our break. So just wanted to highlight businesses assisted since we had that in our example contract. So if you scroll down here, so commercial rehab is similar to owner-occupied rehab. You don't report on the business until you have completed all work on said business, and you no longer have construction signs hanging, everything's good. So you will be reporting on businesses assisted here. Normally this number is identified in the proposed number is identified in the application. So if you don't know how many businesses we're funded to assist, I would take a look at your application. Each applicant was required to identify the proposed number of businesses assisted. And then, so you fill that out in 1A, and then in 1B, you would report on the businesses you have completed assisting with. And 1C, you would provide us their legal names and their DUNS number. And then you would identify to us if this was a new business or if this was an existing business. So if you assisted the Mill Coffee Shop here in Lincoln, for example, that is an existing business, and I would put a 0 in 2A and a 1 in 2B. And then when you answer 2B as an existing, you would indicate if it was an expansion or a relocation. So these can be zeros in here, because oftentimes you aren't able to expand, but it could be a relocation. Maybe it was a business that was not located in the downtown area, and you was then relocated to the downtown area to a new location. So that is businesses. You would also have to fill out this form if you had an economic development grant from the department, and you would be identifying business assisted here too. So, okay, so that is all the project status on the national objective forms. We did a really quick overview on that, and then also on the beneficiary indicator forms. So, Amber, can you pull up the Meeby-Weeby form now? Okay, so this looks very familiar. We have the same status report, and just wanted to give everyone a review of what it looks like in the system for contractor, subcontractor information. So if you scroll down, here you're completing all of these items, like I mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation. Cool. And again, if you have, we have not, these are Section 3 forms, all reference the 13024 CFR 135. There is new regulation, and we'll be issuing new guidance, so on that. And then Amber, can you move to the new hires form? Okay. New hires is a part of Section 3 reporting. And similar to status report, you also have new hire information. So you're letting us know what type of new hire. Is this a professional or is this a technician? There's several other descriptions here. Please be aware of that. If you don't have one that is listed, we do have construction by trade fields for you to enter. And then Steve, we did have a question on this. If you are available, if you could unmute so I know that you're ready for the question.
I have no answer.
For the new hires, do we report all employees hired by the municipality, or do we just report on staff who are involved with the CDBG project?
What does this tie back to, Rebecca?
The new hires, Section 3. Amber, can you scroll to the top of the screen? I think we might have the answer in instructions.
I'm trying to think of by the local unit of government subrecipient.
Yeah.
I don't have an answer for that. We're recording or tracking the employees of the local unit of government.
We are asking for any that are, I believe, hired in association with the CDBG project to be implemented.
Oh,
I
with
believe
the
that's the
project.
answer. I believe that is the answer to the question.
Yeah, that would, it'd have to have a tie back to the funding source and directly supported by the funding source.
So if the local unit of government hired a maintenance worker who only works in City Hall and is not working on the street improvements project, he would not be recorded on this.
That would be my understanding.
That is mine also. Okay. So we are going to take a 10-minute break. I'm going to pull up the census website. If you have more questions on this, again, this was a really quick run through. We'll send you the webinar recording that we did on Amplifund several months ago for your reference, and we'll go through that. So, but if you have questions, send them in the chat. I'll get the census website pulled up and ready for us to take a look at it at 10:40. Welcome back, everyone. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I did pull up a couple of items to show everyone. So before we get into that, I wanted to, again, reference our CDBG webpage, where we do have links to Amplifund guidance and then also data for applicants and grantees. So for Amplifund, we do have information there for as you are implementing CDBG projects. We have the general FAQ that has information, general navigational guidance there, but then we also have community development block grant. We have videos for application guidelines, and then also award management, which a lot of you, if you are hired as a certified administrator, this will be your go-to location. We have documents regarding instructions on completing the project status reports here. And then we also have PSR submission within the system located here on August 4th. If you want to watch a much longer video and hear my voice a little bit more, definitely recommend that. So we do have specific guidance on how to submit drawdowns within the system of Amplifund here, and then also training videos on this. So we didn't go into Amplifund, but if you are brand new hire or brand new to Amplifund, definitely recommend watching these videos, part 1, 2, and 3 to get you started, and then also reading this guidance. There are shorter videos that walk you through specific steps if you don't want to read through everything and watch everything, the entire video. These are a little bit shorter time periods for review. So we also do have a webpage for data for applicants here. You can click on CDBG. We reference LMI information there, but then we also have additional resources you can navigate to get more information and find additional guidance. So let me pull up the screen if it will allow me. So data.census.gov is one of our resources that we do use. Oftentimes I click on the advanced search and I know a couple of the tables already, or if I don't, if I know the table number already, I search for that and then filter it down by my geographic location. So you can also do filters down by geography, which if you don't know what table you want to use, select geography, then place, and then you'll search for the state of Nebraska. And then you can also search for Ravenna. And so this will bring up a lot of the information that you need to kind of fill out the project status reports. And we are working on getting more information and guidance on these tables for you. The census website updates. If any of you have been a certified administrator for the last couple of years, you'll remember that there was a completely different website we informed you to go to besides this one that I'm showing you today. So I already did a search real quick, I believe, for how would I get my Hispanic and Latino origin by race. So one thing to keep in mind is always take a look at what product you are using and what year. So if you're working on a older grant, make sure you're using the table that associates with that application, that time of application for that one. We look at 5-year estimates detail for us. And this one, we are looking at Hispanic, Latino, what is the breakdown? Here's Ravenna here. Here's the breakdown for Nebraska based off of 2019. So 1,300 folks are identified as not Hispanic, but then you also have the breakdown of 85 people do identify as Hispanic, and then the breakdown as the racial breakdown. So hopefully that helps. If you do need assistance on how to fill out certain sections of the project status report and what tables you will be using, definitely let us know, and hopefully we can connect dots. And we are trying to be stronger with our reporting to HUD and having the most accurate data. So if there is something that you struggle with consistently across multiple grants, send it our way. I'm always happy to try to figure out a better way to ensure consistency on this. So let us know. So I think that we'll move back into our presentation now. Amber, I'll let you share your screen. Okay, so in our prior presentation, we talked about reporting, audits. So if you are following along with our manual, we talked about Chapter 13 reporting and then also Chapter 15 audit briefly. Now we're going into Chapter 14 of monitoring, and then we're kind of touching base on Chapter 16 of closeout. So next slide. So monitoring determines compliance with CDBG regulations and cross-cutting regulations. It provides an opportunity to collaborate and recognize subrecipients' accomplishments and areas for improvement. So next slide. So we have a couple different types of monitoring. There is desktop, which materials are submitted to the department, and the department evaluates these materials offsite. Normally here in the Lincoln office, we take a look at everything. There's on-site. Materials are reviewed at the location where project activities are being carried out or project records are being maintained. So maybe we go to the city offices and review all of the documentation at that location, or maybe we go to maybe the certified administrator maintains all the records at their office, then we go to that one, we notify you. Usually we don't do surprise visits because we want to make sure you're there before driving. We also have virtual, and that is a structured review conducted using technology to have a discussion with both the certified administrator and subrecipient. Maybe schedules don't work out the best with our desktop and on-site, and we need to have a further conversation with both entities. We would conduct a virtual. So that's something more recent. We've started to incorporate in our monitoring practice is the virtual of using our WebEx technology, what you guys are using right now to do that, and we would allow everyone to have access to their mute button, unlike today's presentation. So, next slide. So we do have a monitoring compliance report that we will issue. We evaluate components of the CDBG program. So very similar to our training these past 7 webinars now is we review the national objective and the activity eligibility, program performance, general files, environmental review, financial, procurement, professional services, civil rights and fair housing, labor standards, construction, acquisition, relocation, housing rehabilitation, demolition, legal and loan documents, job creation, retention verification, equipment verification. So these often are very targeted to the specific project being implemented by that local unit of government. But as a general rule of thumb, 1 through 8 is reviewed for every single project. We may tack on 9 through 16 depending on the activities being implemented for that. Next slide. So we have, as we review each one of those components I just talked about, we will make a determination on what we have found. So the first is there's an action required. Then there is concern, finding, non-correctable, and satisfactory performance. And then, Amber, can you flip to the next slide? I forget if I define these in the, nope, okay, go back. Okay. And then, Steve, I don't know if you're ready, but if you can help me with these definitions. So, action required. It is actions taken to remove, remedy, or counteract the causes of an existing nonconformity or other undesirable situation. Often we say action required initially because we don't have enough information to evaluate that component and we need additional information provided to us. If there is not additional information provided to us, normally we can then make the next status of evaluation, which would either be concern or finding, maybe satisfactory performance, depending on what you tell us. For concern, so we will never, if you have a component evaluated, it says action required, we cannot issue monitoring clearance until there is no action required listed on our monitoring report. So concern, we define that as deficiency in program performance, not based on statutory, regulatory, or other program requirements. So this could be something, maybe we notice that, trying to think of an example for a concern. Maybe you checked, Steve, do you have a good example? All of mine are actual findings that I'm thinking of.
I don't have a specific example. The concern relates to process you may have in place within the, say, for example, procurement. And it's, maybe it's in the selection process or the scoring process in terms of the items you identify to evaluate. And if it's a concern, that means it's leaning towards being finding. And if that was to be a continuation, that would tie into procurement for the next time within that grant or further, then that could end up being a finding. So concern is a way to assist the subrecipient and the administrator in improving the grant management or the program or the grant. So there could be a concern, for example, in record keeping. especially in client files, as far as documentation and inconsistency between one client file and another. Maybe the letters on notice to proceed are not all signed and dated. It's an oversight, so it can be a concern instead of issuing a clear-cut finding at that time. So those are areas, and there may be an environmental review, a concern with regards to tier 2 and how you evaluated the tier 2s amongst the specific addresses as designated as you move through the funding process for owner-occupied rehab or commercial development. So it's usually an inconsistency within the delivery of the program according to the rules. Does that help, Rebecca?
That does, thank you. Next up is findings. So this is when a deficiency is found based on statutory, regulatory, or program requirements for which we could issue corrective actions. So one of these examples is, let's say you receive an invoice and to be paid, and then you request funds from DED in order to pay that invoice. And we give you said funds, but you wait 3 months to actually pay that invoice for that vendor. And all that time you are earning interest on these federal funds we gave you 3 months ago. That would be a finding because you did not follow the 5-day rule of having over $1,000 in your business, in your bank account determination. So be aware of that. We have that clearly stated in our manual. That would be a finding. So we would issue sanctions or actions depending on how bad this is, what we find. And sometimes that is a management plan. So we could issue a finding and then also say action required, and then request you to submit a management plan to document how you would not do that in the future with CDBG funds. Any other examples you can think of, Steve? I feel like mine got really harsh and extremely specific.
The one you mentioned, Rebecca, in terms of the 5-day $1,000 rule put in place by the state that gives some leeway with regards to federal regulations where you are to move money in and out of accounts when you haven't paid for it upfront first. That is a regulatory item. But you may have done very well with that through a number of draws and deposits, but then there may be times when it happens to go beyond that number of days, and that may be a concern for us that we at the time felt wasn't operational wise a finding in terms of the limitation of that. So concerns can vary. It may be on how you look at whether or not an activity is allowable or unallowable to actually fund or reimburse with CDBG monies. So I think one of the key things is that you don't have to respond to a concern. If you look at I believe the chapter, what is it? Chapter 14 on monitoring. But it is very helpful to have a conversation with the program rep or the individual that issued that concern. Findings are more difficult because it is a finding. It can be cleared. What we did moving into monitoring, as you'll notice, we did delete question of performance because that was a difficult one to evaluate as we move through the compliance review process. So concern finding and what you want to not do is non-correctable. Go ahead, Rebecca.
Non-correctable is defined as an action or occurrence that must meet the rules as applied during the specific time period, which cannot be applied or remedied after the occurrence. So in my example of you waited 3 months and you were earning interest on the federal funds we gave you to pay that invoice to that vendor, that would be considered a non-correctable finding because you can't go back in time. So just be aware of that. We might also associate non-correctable with concern. So one thing to be aware of, satisfactory performance, that means that when we reviewed everything, the determination is a conclusion that you are meeting the statutory and regulatory requirements. So you're always aiming for satisfactory performance when you are implementing a CDBG project. Anything else you want to add, Steve, to this component evaluation results?
Rebecca, the main part is for those that are working with the program, whether it's the general administration, construction management, or housing management, is to realize, as Rebecca said, you can't go back in time, but if you realize that as you're working through a process in terms of your workflow, that you failed to document an item, I would clearly make sure that you do the documentation, especially on those items that are authorizations or implementations in commercial rehab, owner-occupied rehab. If you have 14 client files, but as you begin, I would develop your checklist so that you can, for each client file, you can keep a listing of those items and make sure that you comply with each as you move through so you don't have findings or those that are non-correctable. And it can go besides looking at a concern, a finding, and performance. It can be an evaluation of the overall delivery of the program also. And it can be directed at how the local government manages it, subrecipient, the nonprofit, that entity, or the contracted for services general administrator. So it's weight on each side. Yeah, there are, in terms of remediation and submission of a plan. Worst case scenario is you're sanctioned from participating in the program for X number of periods until you comply.
And we have done that. We have done that in the past. Just wanting to make all of you aware, we have come upon a project that exhibited that level of sanction. So please try to make sure you're compliant with all regulations when implementing a CDBG project. So next slide. So this is something new. So if you are being recertified, this is something exciting. And if you're brand new certified administrators, this is something you can look forward to. So we updated our monitoring process, especially since we are going into AmpliFund more so and getting away from paper forms. That is one of the things that we looked at when we created this new process. So I'm going to describe each one of these compliance status benchmarks. So the first one is benchmark 1, and this is a desktop review conducted by the department. So you would be submitting materials to the department. The subrecipient submits the requested documentation to the department, and this usually occurs 6 to 8 months after the subrecipient receives the notice of release of funds environmental clearance. And we will inform you exactly what documentation that we are requesting. So to preface all of this, we are developing several of these tools currently and plan on hosting a training on this new process in the first quarter of 2022. Ideally January, but don't hold me to it. It will be in the first quarter. And we will be talking about the applicability of older grants and then newer grants for this. So keep in mind, more information will come on this, but our new benchmarks will be first a desktop review. We will ask you to complete documentation from us, and then you would submit that documentation. We are planning on using the share file, what you guys have used during the certification training for you to upload materials instead of Amplifund. But we are still piloting it out, but right now that is the plan. So benchmark number 2, after we review all the items that were submitted to us via benchmark 1, we're gonna make a determination, and also during other components that are submitted to us, your drawdowns, also your project status reports, we'll make a determination on whether your compliance review continues either desktop or on-site/virtual monitoring. So benchmark 2 is we make a determination, NDED does. And we'll let you know if it's going to continue as desktop or if it will continue with on-site virtual monitoring compliance. Compliance status benchmark 3 is triggered within the 3 months of the subrecipient agreement period of performance end date, or if the subrecipient has expended 75% of CDBG funds. We would initiate the secondary review of your project. So, and that would either be desktop or on-site virtual one. So we will do another compliance review. Benchmark 4, the subrecipient has met the subrecipient agreement conditions identified in the contract agreement, and they've submitted all relevant final reports. So just like I was talking about at the beginning of this presentation, final reports include final wage, final financial, final project status, final job creation report, depending on the type of activities. But normally it's final financial and then final project status report applies to every single CDBG project we award. So, and then with compliance status benchmark 4, we would issue a certification of completion. Any questions on that? So this is new, we're developing it, but this is the framework we're working under. It will begin in 2022 officially for all of CDBG grants. I will preface this with the department is behind in monitoring, and we are figuring out an action plan on getting caught up, and so we can close out very old grants and get it down to a manageable number on our end. So next slide. Steve, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not at this time, Rebecca, thank you.
Okay. Just also be aware of non-compliance. In the last couple of years, since I've been at the agency, we've had really great certified administrators who have been very responsive when we ask questions and trying to evaluate the regulations. But we've also had some local units of government and certified administrators not respond to our emails, phone calls regarding their implementation of CDBG regulations, federal cross-cutting regulations. So we've had to develop what we would do in those situations. So we would be applying sanctions to the local unit of government. Sanctions include the delay of payment of remaining CDBG funds, ability to secure future DED grants, and repayment of existing grant funds. So we might find that we need to terminate the contract, and all grant funds that you've expended to date would need to be repaid to us. So hopefully it doesn't get to that. Overall, we want good communication between all of us. Yeah. Anything else you want to add, Steve?
No, except don't hesitate to have a conversation with your program rep if there are some concerns that the local government has expressed in terms of how the program is being managed in terms of oversight. It's very difficult for the subrecipient, the local unit of government, when there's a change in other words, grant administrators come and go. And when they're left in a uncomfortable situation in terms of management, that can put them in compliance, being out of compliance, and then it also can cause some delays, especially when the environmental review hasn't been completed correctly. That's it.
Cool. Next slide. So we touched upon this a little bit in a couple of slides earlier, compliance status benchmark 4. So that's meant monitoring compliance. Clearance has been achieved. We've evaluated all the components. We've reached our final determination, and you've received clearance. But this also leads into closeout process. So we have final reports that must be submitted to DED and accepted by us. So ones that apply to everybody are the final project status report and the final financial, but then, and the second public hearing, if you guys want to put stars by these, the fair housing actions implemented and LEP documentation. Now, dependent on what type of project, if you are doing a late construction project and Davis Bacon is triggered, then you would need to complete the final wage report. If you were awarded funds for a planning grant, you would need to submit the final product document to us for us to verify that the grant funds that you used align with what you applied for. That's a core component. If you are meeting the national objective of LMJ, you would need to provide us a final job creation retention report. So kind of keep that all in mind. So let's talk about the last three here that I'm not sure if you guys are all familiar with. But in chapter 16 of our CDBG manual, we do go into what these mean exactly. For second public hearing, it is in the CDBG regulations that 2 public hearings have to be held. The first one needs to occur at time of application for CDBG funds. So often if you are hired as a CDBG certified administrator, that first public hearing is already completed. So at time of application. So we would need a second public hearing that would inform the public. Usually this informs the public of the progress of the project and it being implemented. So you shouldn't have this in the first 6 months of your project. This is usually in the last year, 6 months before your project ends, letting everyone know. So be aware of the timing of the second public hearing. Anything else you want to add, Steve, to second public hearing? we do need this documentation submitted to us in order to close out. So that includes the notice that went in the newspaper or was posted, and meeting minutes. I think that's it. Steve, anything else here?
The emphasis is on the second public hearing during the implementation phase. So unfortunately, we find prior grants, when we go in to monitor, the subrecipients' second public hearing hasn't been conducted. It is a federal regulation in terms of citizen participation, so it's best to do that during the implementation so that the local government can have the public awareness, public be aware of what is happening with the project, especially if there's questions. That's it.
Yep, and this also aligns with the citizen participation plan that the local government is required to submit at time of application to the department, identifying, and it's listed out in that citizen participation plan. So extremely important. Don't forget the second public hearing. If you are hired as a certified administrator, I would just map out the calendar of this entire project and determine when is the best time to host that, so you do not forget. Fair housing action implemented. So earlier in this webinar series, we talked about fair housing and how at the time of special conditions, you submit to the department a proposed action that is affirmatively furthering fair housing information within the community. So we are looking, by the time we close out, and hopefully it's done earlier and you submit it to us, we are looking that you actually completed that proposed action that you submitted to us at the time of special conditions. So again, map out your calendar. If you said you were going to do events during Fair Housing Month, which is usually April, make sure you don't forget to do that. If you do forget, and everything's tied to Fair Housing Month and it's now November and your contract ends in December, you're going to have to figure out what else you can do and maybe connect with your program rep. We cannot close out your grant unless the Fair Housing action is completed. Next up is LEP documentation. We talked about this on the same day we talked about fair housing. So I think it was webinar 3. So you create a 4-factor analysis on what limited English proficiency. You may have had to develop a LAP plan. As part of your subrecipient agreement, you do need to, between the local unit of government and NDED, you do need to submit documentation demonstrating the LAP services provided by the subrecipient during the course of the CDBG contract. Include any requests by LEP persons for such services. If you had a language assistance plan adopted and implemented, provide summary response identifying the services and vital documents provided to LEP persons in regard to carrying out those project activities. So overall, you said you were going to do something, make sure it actually happens throughout the implementation of the project. Oftentimes, the limited English proficiency representative for that local unit of government is the clerk. She would just need to keep a logbook of interactions she had and how she assisted folks who did not speak English, and made sure that they had access to services. Anything else you want to add to that, Steve?
No, that covers it.
Okay. So take a look at Chapter 16. We do have we have another reference for older projects on a leverage fund statement, but those are, for older projects, we no longer reference leverage. Just make sure you are capturing everything that is required within your subrecipient agreement between DED and the local unit of government. So, okay, so you have we'll pretend and fast forward throughout the life of our grant. You have received monitoring compliance clearance issued. You've submitted to us all of these final documents that we stated here. You are feeling really great. So then you're going to click the next slide, Amber. And NDED is ready to issue a certificate of completion. This is a letter correspondence that we mail out to you and also email out to you. It is a core thing to be aware of for this project. So it's as important as your notice of approval letter. You should keep your certificate of completion. So this letter normally informs you to maintain records for 10 years after the date of issuance of certificate of completion, and also to be aware of the 5-year change in use of property, which we talked a little bit about throughout several of these presentations. And that's referenced in 24 CFR 570. Steve, anything else you want to talk about with the certificate of completion?
No, except that remember to retain it, and the records that you retain should be kept in a fireproof box or some container that's fireproof, and also would be in a placement that if there is a flood or other occurrence, that it wouldn't be logged with water and unreadable. So it should be accessible. It could be digital, depends upon how you want to store the data and what your requirements are at the local unit of government. And you are to keep a property record. So if you have a grant issued and there's property involved, you do need to keep a property record, which would include those properties improved or that were provided the assistance. And especially when you're dealing with commercial and owner-occupied rehab, as far as those necessary records. That's all. As I said, I have nothing else to add.
Amber, do we have any questions?
No new questions.
Okay.
Oh, we just had something come in. Does the 5-year change in use of property start at the time of certificate of completion?
So it depends on the activity. So, and Steve, please correct me if I'm wrong. I believe for owner-occupied rehab and commercial rehab, it starts at the time of construction has been completed. And then for if you have like a senior center, that would start at the time project, I thought it was project construction has been completed and it's operational, but Steve, please confirm me because you're the expert on that.
For owner-occupied rehab and commercial property, there may be other legal ties, whether there's liens on the property and affordability periods, and those begin at the time of when documents are filed and closure and everything. The 5-year change deals with the period when that certificate is issued. So for 5 years, when that certificate is completed. Now, if you have property it took 2 years to get a certificate of completion, I would retain that and look at what happens within that 5-year period from the certificate also. The main thing is you're not forecasting or running a clock so that you can change the use. There is some prorated paybacks that may happen depending upon whether that property is sold or whether it doesn't meet a national objective within that 5-year, or the use is not allowable, eligible under the program. So you could run into some owing the state funds and the federal government. So we can follow up too and get you a defined period when that 5-year change begins. I'd have to look at the regs. I don't have them in front of me right now.
Good question. So we've covered the majority of information within our manual with the 7-part webinar series. You may have noticed that we did not touch upon relocation and acquisition. That is a heavy topic. Our stance on relocation, is that try to avoid it at all costs because it makes your project very complicated. And with acquisition, we touched upon it briefly during the webinar series, but there are some HUD webinars that we're going to send out to you guys for your reference. But if you do have questions, please let us know if you are participating in the project on those. We can help you out with that. Definitely with any acquisition, attorney should probably be consulted on that and take a look at our manual chapters for more references on everything that needs to be completed. So anything else you want to add, Steve, regarding the webinar series?
You're referring to HUD's webinar series?
No, to our webinar series.
Oh, I was going to say, go to HUD's too. If you're looking for information on acquisition, relocation, disposition. No, I don't have anything to add on our series.
Okay, so thank you guys for all participating. For those of you that are seeking full certification or recertification, we will be emailing out the exam on tomorrow morning, and we'll send you an email also saying when it closes. If you find that you need additional time for whatever reason, please let Amber know. The questions, you would need an 80% to pass. It is open book, which should be way easier now that it's digitized and you can do Control F for information. And you can use all of the materials that we provided to you during this webinar. I will be trying to get some answers to some of your questions, and I'll upload that to the share file for all of you guys to have access to. We will take down that share file account, so if you have not downloaded all the materials at this point in time, I recommend doing that by end of day on Friday. We will delete all that folder within there. I think that's it. Need an 80% for the exam, and normally people complete the test within an hour and a half. And we won't have a drawdown example, but we may have a question on percentages for that. So any other questions? If you're confused by a question, you can give me a call. I will be in the office all week, and I can talk you through the question if it is confusing how we presented it in the layout, which tends to happen. So no worries on that. Steve, am I forgetting anything, or Amber?
I don't think so, Rebecca.
Okay,
That
cool.
should cover it. I would encourage all of you to ask questions now following if you're unsure, even if there was one in the first training, second, third, or fourth that you felt was unclear, please do send those to Rebecca.
And Amber. Amber's keeping me accountable throughout this webinar series.
Okay, send them to Rebecca and Rebecca will answer them, but forward them to Amber first.
Thank you. Okay, cool. We will finish this up 30 minutes early, and I look forward to seeing how everyone does on the exam. So perfect. You guys have a great day. Oh, we do have a question, Amber. Will the recorded videos be made available for people who miss certain days before the exam closes? Amber, do you want to take that one?
Anyone who's requested a video has been sent it. So the answer is yes, but so far, I mean, except for today, if someone missed today, that one hasn't been available or sent out yet.
So if you want to view a recording, please email Amber. Maybe you got distracted with a phone call or a burst pipe in your office. I don't know what could happen. So reach out to her today. Cool. Okay, well, we will sign off. You guys have a great day.